So this is the instructional video on how to put the GPI 3D printer together once it gets to you from the United States. On top I should have a baggie of screws and whatnot. There's two different kinds of screws in here. There's the 3/4 and the 1/2 inch, and a few nuts and little feet for the legs on the printer. But they're both 10/32 screws. They should have the same thread as most of the other screws on the printer. A couple of things to go over. This is the power supply right here. It supplies power to the 3D printer. Right here you have the extruder. This heats up the plastic and it pushes it out with the motor. This is the X-axis gantry. You'll hear me say that a bunch of times. This is the Y-axis right here, and then you've got the Z-axis, which is the up and down motion through these screws. Right here you have the 3D printer motherboard. This is what drives the entire machine. The USB port, the power supply plug right there. This is the extruder heat area. So if you have a dual extruder or a heated bed, but don't worry about that too much. This is where the motherboard plugs in. Yeah, I know it looks a little funky, but it works well. This is the most reliable printer that I have at the moment. I'll try and send when I come in October, send something a little bit nicer and prettier, and something that well, I mean, this works really well. So that's the motherboard. This is the 3D printer feet. Okay, there's two here. You just cut this tape, and this is where the 1/2 inch screws go. These will come right down to the bottom, and they'll screw into these self-tapped, or to these tapped holes that are on the bottom. That's what these are for. And the rubber feet go in. The screws go into the rubber feet, then they go into the legs of the printer, and then you can screw that into the tapped bottom here. Okay, the power supply, you can lift up the entire printer, and the power supply should pop out the bottom or stay in the packaging right there. Something that this printer does that no other, well, not that I know of at least, a whole lot of other printers don't do, is that you're able to take this gantry right here and flip it on its side. That way it makes it easier to pack. So really quickly, just take this apart. Now these are 3/4 inch 10/32 screws. They're supplied in the baggie here. And behind each of these screws is a nut, and you're going to want to hold on to that nut because that's what you're putting together the gantry with again. Now, to package it, there's only 4 screws. So there's 2 on this face, and then 2 on this other face. There's not 2 on the bottom right now because they're inside the baggie, but once you flip this over, you'll need 6 of these 3/4 inch screws. Okay. And then you'll lift. Remember, hold on to those nuts and don't lose them. Okay, so that comes off like that. You'll probably want to slide it to one side just to make it easier for you to put on. If you're doing this by yourself, this is the way you'll have to end up doing it. Okay, see how that slides right down there? And then you'll set all 6 screws in there. Now, also that I'm supplying with that is a glass bed plate, and you'll slide this underneath the washers. Okay, and then set them next to these nuts that are holding the this silver thing in place. And four clamps that hold the build plate in place, so that when you're printing, it won't move. And then the linear motion is this direction, and then up and down with the z-axis. Okay. Now we'll take all this back apart. Whenever you're moving from location to location, you can pull off the bed plate and keep this safe. This will break very easily. And then you'll lift up on here. Okay, slide it out, set the printer flat, set this on top. Okay, just any way that it makes you feel comfortable. And again, those four screws to hold it into place. Okay, these three switches right here, there's 2 pins for these switches. You've got the Y, X2, and the Z. These are for the access switches for the printer to let it know that it's all the way to one side. Okay, so those 3 sets of pins will set in like this, and you're there. It's labeled pretty clearly. These are going to go to the, and it doesn't have to be one way or the other. They're not polarized pins. So the S and the minus are the ones that are supposed to be plugged in. But see, on this side you've got the S plus minus. You're going to skip those 2, and you're going to move to the next one, and that's where you're going to plug in the X2 switch. X2 switch to there. And then you've got the Y switch to the very next set of pins. Remember, S minus. And then you've got the Z axis. You're going to skip the next set. You're going to skip over those, and you're going to put those on the next 2. So you've got your X, Y, and your Z. The next thing to plug in is your T0. That's your thermistor for the temperature sensor. T0 is clearly marked on the board. That's the next 2, or the first 2 on the left if you're orientating the board the same way I am. And then you have 2 motor plugs. These 2 motor plugs are for the Z-axis, and on every single one of the motors plugs, I've got a white strip on one side, and that white strip is where the 1B pin is. And again, everything's clearly marked on the motherboard. So the 1B, which is again orientated to the right side as you're holding it, if I'm holding it the same way you are. And so that white stripe goes towards that 1B side. The Y motor plugs into the next set, right there, Y. And you've got the X motor strip pointing to the same 1B. Okay. Then you've got the E0 or extruder motor, and you'll plug that in right there. Okay. A couple of other things, and I'm going to unplug everything else so that you can see better. A couple of other things you'll need to plug in. The power for the fans. These fans are pretty important. What they do is they blow air across the motherboard so it doesn't overheat. And then there's another fan over at the extruder to keep the hot end from heating up the entire throat. And if that happens, it ends up clogging a lot. So these two fans need to be on at all times, and the power for the fan is right here. So when you plug in your power supply, the plug for the power supply is like this, and so on the motherboard is the plus and the minus. Make sure that those are the plus and the minus, the same for the power supply that's plugged into. It's got to match the power supply here. Okay. So what you'll do is you'll unscrew these two screws on the end, and it doesn't matter which two, just as long as you have a positive and a negative. And you're gonna plug the black into the negative and the red into the positive. Okay? So that's the black into the negative, the red into the positive, and they're clearly marked here too. Now on this side there's a D10 on the motherboard, and the D10 is where your extruder is going to plug in, and this is the hot end for the extruder. This electrical tape marks the positive and the negative, which the brown is the positive, the white is the negative. You can take this electrical tape off, it's not going to hurt anything. And what you're going to do is you're going to plug in or unscrew these two terminals and screw the brown into the positive and the white into the negative side, which is the opposite side of the positive. And just make sure that those are in there pretty well. The fan, once you've got everything set up, just kind of set it on top so that it blows air across it, and you're not sucking air away from it. You want to blow air across it, that way it just has a bigger flow. It's not pulling air from the entire room. On the side here, also the USB port, that's where you're plugged into the computer, and I'll supply a cable for you. The reset switch, just in case something catastrophic happens, you can always hit the reset switch on the side, or unplug the machine. That works too. There's a switch on the power supply that'll let you turn it on and off from there, and you can set this anywhere. It doesn't have to be attached to the printer. You can set it to the side or whatever. I think that's pretty much it. I left some extra wires here for the expansion for a heated bed, but it's not necessary. The heated bed is for other plastics such as ABS or some of the exotic plastics that need extra heat to keep attached to the printer so that it doesn't fall off. Until then, when you're printing with PLA, this should work really well. What I've done in the past is I've used a stick of glue. The glue stick, just when you remove the tape, just apply the glue stick to the entire bed surface and put the tape on top of that. Otherwise you'll have the tape lifting up on one side, and that causes for some problems printing. Once the tape gets kind of like this, you'll want to replace it. I'll replace it for you guys before I send it over, and I'll send over a roll of tape. That way you'll have extra. But one layer of tape should be fine. If you're running into problems where two layers of tape will help, I don't know that it would, but by all means, try it. Thank you, and God bless you guys.